if climate change explains something significant, but probably less than half of the increase in fires in the American West. We also have this suppressive fire management practice, which has been homogeneous at best and simply suppressive at worst. We have drought that to some degree is just going to happen. So there's natural cycles of drought, and it may just be our time, right? And what else?
You have sprawl, which is putting people in direct contact with lands that might otherwise burn and burn themselves out with some regularity.
We care more about every single fire. Yeah.
We've got, I hesitate to even say it, but we've got people who have lost the plot and are no longer in on the agreement that once we all held that it was bad when things burned, right? When, that's not to say that every fire is bad, but there are people who are setting destructive fires with their own purposes, whether it's to make the news or something else. But the fact is,
that's right.
The fire is a force multiplier, right? So terrorists trade in fear. An organization of a certain size can create a much bigger effect if they can scare you into hurting yourself. Fire is not exactly that. It's not about fear. It's actually destructive. But the point is, one idiot can do an awful lot of damage. They can control an awful lot of resource by triggering these things. And the problem is there's really not a whole lot we can do to stop it. You wouldn't want to live in the dystopia in which everything was so well monitored. But,
So you called them people who have lost the plot. What I've written here is intentional provocateurs, as opposed to sort of human landscape modelers who are trying to do some kind of good. So from that call figure that I showed, it's be they people who have lost the plot and are individual bad actors, or people who have lost the plot and think that fire is a reasonable form of modern protest. Arson is actually not a legitimate thing to be engaging in now. And there has been, as the fires have become worse and worse over the last several weeks, there has been increasingly, as you would expect, the mainstream media is now saying anyone who talks about arson as a cause of any of these fires is clearly, on the right and doesn't have their finger on the pulse of reality. And I would say once again, the idea that with so much data still out, with so much of the story still unknown, the idea that it is impossible that any of these fires were set by arson, and therefore, if you say that any of them were or might have been set by arson, you are making a political point, is itself a political point, and therefore we don't have to listen to you.
Well, and also
actually, at this point, we know for sure that some of them were set by arson. We don't know what the political leanings of those people were.
Or that it was political at all.
Or that it was political at all. But there is good, strong evidence at this point that some, not most, but some of these fires were set by humans with purposes that were not in anyone's best interests.
Yeah, and the fact is we've had tons of arson here in Portland in the last 100 some odd days.
Yeah.
Right? Now it hasn't been wildfires, but it is a perfectly legitimate question. We have ample evidence that there has been arson involved. Some of the fires that were started by arson were then put out by citizens immediately. So, what the nature of any of this was, we don't know. But nonetheless, we have to look ourselves in the eye and say a couple things. One, you cannot play the stupid game where you tell certain people that whatever they do in the name of some cause that we agree in the abstract is a good one is legitimate, right?
Yes.
You cannot set a fire against racism. A, that doesn't make any freaking sense. And B, it's going to become an excuse for everybody who's looking. What's really happened is we've got...
It's the same error, though, as racism is a pandemic. It's the same error. It's using the metaphor is using the thing that is actually going on in the physical world and applying that as a metaphor to the current social justice issue. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but it's never literal.
Yeah.
It's never literal. You can't, that phrase was amazing. What did you just say? You can't set a fire against racism. Or that wasn't quite what you said.
No, it was close. Yeah. Something like that.
And no, systemic racism is not a pandemic, and you can't set a fire against racism. And that doesn't mean that we're saying racism isn't real, but you guys have seriously lost the plot if that's what you think is the right way to deal with this.
Well, or the rest of us have freaking lost the plot, because what we actually have is a long-standing, tiny anarchist fringe that has of late glommed on to a nominally anti-racist movement, right? And the point is, what's actually driving this? Anarchism. And what does it look like? Anarchism, right?
Go figure.
Go figure.
Yeah.
They've been telling us that they wanted anarchy, and they've told us why, and it doesn't add up. But the point is, we now have municipal authorities making excuses for these people that is going to increase their likelihood of committing all kinds of crimes, because they've effectively been told, all of the people who've been released after committing crimes and being arrested for them, and all of the tools,
bail money that was collected to get them released.
Right. We had Ted Wheeler announcing this week that he's no longer going to allow the use of tear gas to dispel these riots. And the point
he snuck that in right as the fires were getting real close to Portland, kind of like an 11th hour thing that no one was going to notice. Yep.
Yeah, it's preposterous.